Hello everyone, in today's Lightroom session I'm going to be going over some photos that I took during Thunder over Louisville. This is a great event for 2018. It kicks off the Derby season for us here in Louisville, Kentucky, and I want to go ahead and show you some photos I edited. Now in this version of the Lightroom session I'm going to go ahead and show you photos that I've already processed. I felt like in the first episode I was kind of rushing things, and I didn't really feel like I should be rushing things because like when I'm editing, I could spend like literally 12 minutes on a slider and that would be really boring to watch. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to show you how I select photos and how I've already edited them, and then I can talk about why I edited it that way. Hopefully it works out better for this particular session, but we can only learn by trying, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and select the photos that I'm actually going to save and edit in Lightroom. I actually took about 1,200 pictures, which, you know, when you actually go to an air show, you take a lot of pictures, right? You go ahead and you run through it the first time, cut down to, I think I cut down to about 166 was the number. And then from there, I took a more detailed look and I cut it all the way down to what is right now 34 pictures. So I can go ahead and show them to you right now on the big screen. So the first one is just the banner because it's a good introduction to like a photo series. So I would probably crop this down a little bit and then edit it. This one, of course, is the unedited version of the raw. There were some ducks in the river, so I decided to take one. This one actually turned out quite well, so I might edit that one up, and just to try it, you know, to be a little bit amusing. Now this is a process wall right here. As you can see, there's a lot of detail here. The person parachuting in, very nice detail. But what's more important about this picture and why I selected it is that the background is actually really interesting. If you look around here, you can see a lot of people in the building. There's a tripod right here. If you look on this side, there's big families watching this parachute and just watching the event in general. So not only is the main subject kind of in focus and interesting, but also the background's interesting. So that's the reason why I chose this one, and we're going to talk about this one in more detail as we move along. Again, this one is another one with parachuting. The reason why I like when you have 1,200 pictures, right? The ones that you select generally has something to do with the background, especially for air shows, because the foreground, it's all going to be the same. There's going to be thousands of the same pictures out there. So what's going to make your pictures unique is generally what's going to be in the background for air shows, right? Whether it's like a very nice blue sky or there's a streak in this case going through, it's going to make your pictures look unique. Some people will not like that. They prefer to have a perfect background. That's their taste. For me, I like to actually have something that's a little bit noticeable. It'll actually make people stop for a second on your photo, and then they might actually remember it. Because you got to remember, there's going to be thousands of the same photos out there. Whatever you can do to make your photos unique, that's what I look for. Here, again, nothing really in particularly amazing about the shot with the F-16s, but there is a streak coming through this photo. Again, makes it a little bit unique. That's why I selected this one for editing. This one, it's actually like the way that it's shot right now, it looks like it's completely too dark, but with a raw setting, you can actually bring all of it back and it's going to look really nice because there's not a high degree of dynamic range in this photo. That's why we shoot raw, but I haven't edited this one. Here's another process raw. I particularly like this one because it's kind of the classic look. You know, it's a big bomber. It's got that streaks where the engines is flying by. It just looks really good. Really like this photo. This one right here of the acrobats flying, it's actually was the easiest one to process. The exposure was perfect, you know, the background was nice. There's some nice puffy clouds to kind of add contrast to the background. It just turned out to be a really nice image. And as we move along, this one, again, I chose it because there's some, you know, there's some streaks in the background. It makes it look nice. If you punch up the blue sky, it's going to look really nice. Again, some unique images. This one I caught them starting their acrobatics, so it's rather nice. Just a nice image overall. Good detail in the aircraft without me having to, you know, basically punch up the shadows or the highlights. So it's just a well exposed image right here. This is the only picture I took of the big jumbo jet, so that's why I kept this one. This one, it's nice and clean, and also this one, but it's the belly of the aircraft, so I wanted to keep two that were, in different positions of the aircraft. This one I particularly like. It's one of my favorite ones. It's of the A-10, but that streak in the background going right across the airplane, that's kind of unique. It's something that not a lot of people are going to have. It may be the only one, and that's why I kept it, and I went ahead and processed it, because it's going to make for a very unique image. It's underexposed, but because everything's underexposed, this is going to be really easy to bring back. And these are of the two aircrafts flying together. I don't particularly like this because I actually had my shutter speed too high, so I'm not getting any motion in the propellers, but it's worth keeping and seeing if I can do a better job at it. One of my particular things that I like to do when I'm selecting photos is I like to select photos where there's something, to give it reference. So the bridge in the airplane in the same image is really nice. And of course, this one was just pure luck that I was able to actually capture the airplane at the top of the image. And of course, the smoke coming out makes for a nice, use of the entire image. So pretty cool. Some big pictures of airplanes that take up the entire frame in case I need to actually blow it up. This one I'm going to have to bring back the shadows quite a bit in order to do that. This particular one right here, I like because you actually get the picture of the jet engines. It's actually very difficult sometimes to get a good picture of the afterburners actually burning. So when you actually get those, you want to save those, and definitely want to save them. This one, same thing. You can tell that he was actually flying really fast. You can see the afterburners going on right there. That's why I processed this picture and I saved it. Also, for the next one up, same thing. I mean, it's a nice image, and I get the picture of the flames, which is super cool. These pictures are a little bit later in the day, in which I'm starting to get a nice background, and then I have the helicopters coming in. It just makes for a very interesting image. Same thing, really nice background, the helicopters, giving it the scene a little bit more taste. This one I saved just purely for the background because the background was really interesting, so we punched up the colors, and it's going to make for something really cool. Some helicopter shots. Not sure if I'm going to save these, to be honest, but they still look really good. Took a picture of I took a picture of a kid, and it looks really nice. I actually like him to be completely dark. I think it would make for a very interesting photo. Gonna have to play around with that. So that's all of the images that I saved. So that is all of the images that I saved for Thunder over Louisville. Let's go ahead and go into each one of the images and talk about how I process them. So if we go into the first image, as I said before, the reason why I like this image is, number one, the main subject there's nice detail to it. He has a nice bright parachute, but the background is also very interesting because there are people back there. So if you zoom in and out of the background, you can actually see some really interesting things. There's a lot of detail there. These cameras nowadays, they can save so much of the image. In order to actually get this much detail, what I did was I went ahead and brought up the exposure. And this is one of the things that I do very often, is that I will bring down the contrast. In this case, I brought it all the way down to 50. And then what I did was I went ahead and I punched up the clarity to really bring back the background into nice sharp focus. So if I were to do both sharp contrast and sharp clarity, it would really darken too much of the image. But by lowering the contrast and then working with the clarity, I can actually make a super clean, sharp image, but I'm not really darkening the overall photo too much. It's one of the tricks that I like to use a lot. I'll back off a lot on the contrast, and then I will go ahead and ramp up clarity on the other side. So that was the first thing I did. In a lot of the images that you do when you're taking it outside is that you will really back off on the highlights to bring back the details, because when it's first exposed, you can tell that a lot of the background's going to be very white, So having the highlights backed off really helps. And then you increase in the shadows to get back detail of the building. I can probably increase it even more to bring more brightness to the building, but it is supposed to be of the background. You know, the main subject is the guy parachuting in, so keeping it a little dark is actually kind of nice. Now, I did punch up the vibrance and saturation just because on most days you really want that nice blue sky. I can probably punch it up even more, but I'd probably be playing with it a little bit too much, trying to keep it somewhat realistic to the day, and also saturation. So you can really punch up this image if you really wanted to. So if you wanted to make an Instagram photo of this, you would really punch it up, make that sky really blue, and then that building really stand out. Makes for a great image. Down here, I punched up the lights. Again, trying to brighten up the overall image. This is why we have that nice little curve. And then in the background, we went ahead and did a little bit of darkening of the image. It just helps get rid of, like, I don't know, there's usually like a film of haze around the photo, and just by darkening the shadows, you kind of get rid of that. Something that I really like doing. I didn't play around with any of the saturations for specific colors for this one because I felt like the colors overall did a really good job. And then I did my general detail sharpening of the person. I went ahead, highlighted him, and if you hit the Alt key and you touch one of these sliders, you can actually see the images, and then you can sharpen it and adjust it accordingly. So I liked it where I was, and then I did not add any vignetting to it. So overall, what I was really going for this image was I wanted a nice, clean, and sharp background in addition to the main subject, which is the person parachuting in. So it makes for a very interesting image. Moving on to the bomber. This is what I call a classic image. It's just something that, I don't know, I really like. You know, as a person that likes aircraft, you like these big bombers coming in, and they're flying relatively slow, so it's actually pretty easy to get a good image of it. I just like how it's a little offset to one side, but you have those nice streaks of engine smoke coming out. Makes for a nice classic photo. Fairly easy to actually edit this one. So again, exposure was great. I didn't add any contrast because it really didn't need it. What it did need though is for me to bring back a lot of the shadow. So it's all the way up at 100. This is one of the reasons why we use RAW, is because a lot of the times when you're taking pictures of aircrafts, the underside of the aircraft is really underexposed because there's so much ambient light, and there's usually no light right underneath the aircraft, so it's always almost exposed really darkly. If we go back to the original image, if you can look at it right now, you can tell that you can hardly see any details underneath the wings. It's just how it is when you take pictures. So when you bring out a camera to take airshow shots, you definitely need a camera with very, very high degree of dynamic range. You want, like, at least 14 stops if you can get it. You don't really want to bring a camera with like 12 stops of dynamic range. You're not going to be able to bring back those shadows and those highlights as much as you want to, because it's really bright outside, but you're going to be taking pictures of aircrafts in which they're going to have really, really dark spots. Now, one of the things that I did in addition to that is, you'll notice that I've always added a little bit of sharpening just to clean up the lines and the details, and of course vibrance and saturation to ensure that we get a nice blue sky. Again, when we go back into the curves, what we did was we bumped up the highlights to improve the overall brightness of the pictures. I went the opposite direction on the shadows because I'm really trying to bring out the details underneath the aircraft. As you can see, as I move this over to this side, I get more detail back of the aircraft, but I don't want to bring it too far because you start getting really weird jaggedy lines, because you're not supposed to push a raw image that far. You definitely can with a crop sensor. My Fuji camera is a crop sensor, so the raw images you can't push completely all the way to 10 on everything, without having some abnormalities that comes into the picture. So having a full frame camera, there's definitely a lot of benefits to it, but still a crop sensor camera can still do the job and do it really well. One thing I did notice, and this is something that I kind of noticed shooting with a crop sensor, which is the first time. I'm usually shooting on a full frame when I'm out taking airshow pictures, is that I actually needed to add a little bit of noise reduction. This is not something that I've done on full frame cameras before. I traditionally shoot on a Canon or a Nikon D800, and with that I never really had to add noise reduction. But what I noticed for like crop sensor cameras is that if I don't add noise reduction, you can tell that there's definitely, when I remove noise reduction, that there is a little pixelation. So having a little noise reduction does help the overall image getting smoothed out, and it just smooths out the image, which is just fine because it's already plenty sharp for what I want anyways. And then add a little bit of vignetting just to kind of center your focus on the aircraft. So something that I've noticed, this one right here, this is actually the easiest one to actually to process, because it was just taken just right. As you can see, when you look at it in its raw form, it's very nicely well exposed. You don't really need to play with the shadows. There's a lot of detail there. The sky's already relatively blue, so it was super simple. There wasn't a lot of things that I needed to do in order to get a nice blue sky and get those yellows to pop. So really easy to process, and this is kind of what you want when you're taking pictures, but you don't always get that because the weather changes throughout the day, and sometimes you'll get that nice blue sky and you'll get some really easy photos to edit, and sometimes you really have to work for it, which I will show you in a couple of images coming up. A little bit extra on the exposure. Because it's so well exposed, I can actually ramp up on the contrast, whereas on some of the other ones, because it's kind of really high dynamic range, I actually have to do my trick of lowering the contrast and really bumping up in clarity. When it's super well exposed, what you'll notice is I can bump up on the contrast and I can bump up on the clarity, and it's going to give me a nice real crispy image, and it's something that's going to be super detailed and really good to look at. But that's only if the conditions are completely perfect when you take the picture. So those are the magic shots during the air shows, and you only get a couple of those probably per air show. This happens to be particularly one of them, in which I can bump up on contrast and clarity and the image still looks really good. I did still work on the shadows just because I wanted the planes to be as bright as possible, but I didn't have to bring it all the way to 100 to bring back all of the shadows. I can actually leave it relatively, in the 60s. That's not too bad. And then I bumped, highlights just to be able to get more detail into the puffs of smoke, which is kind of nice. Although having less is okay because it gives it a little softening effect. If really depends on what you like, but the less you did on the highlights, the puffier the smoke is. So just whatever your preference is on that one. Bumped up the whites, and of course, as I said, since the blue sky was already really relatively blue, I didn't really have to do much in the saturation in the vibrance department because the sky was already so well exposed. It kind of naturally comes out when you work on the clarity and the contrast. As you can see, if I bump up on the clarity even more, the blue sky comes in even more. So super easy image to play with. Didn't even have to play with the tone curves. Just liked it the way it is without having to do anything. And then of course I zoomed in on one of the pilots, and then I went ahead and adjusted my sharpness or my details for sharpening, which all you have to do is hit the Alt key and then you can work with the sliders to get the sharpness where you want it. Just be careful not to over sharpen things. It does look weird if you over sharpen. Again, Because I'm shooting on a crop sensor body, what I'm noticing is I am adding a bit of noise reduction in there to help smoothen out the image. Considering that I have so much contrast and so much clarity bumped in there, having a little noise reduction to smooth out the image is actually a good thing. And you can tell that, overall, relatively speaking, even when I zoom in, it looks really good as an image. You don't, like I said, you don't get many of these images in which it's that easy to edit, but when you do, yeah, you're very thankful. This is probably my favorite photo coming out. It's just because it's very unique. It's a unique aircraft, and then you have something in the background that kind of is just placed right at the right spot, and it's a photo that chances are nobody else has, and that's the reason why I like the photo. It's because it's very unique. If we look all the way back at the photo when we first started out with, it was very darkly exposed. You can tell that this was later on in the day, and the sky was starting to darken and a lot of clouds were there. So we really had to work a little bit more in order to bring back the image to where it's something really nice. So let's go ahead and talk about this. Definitely had to bump up the exposure. As you can tell, when I first showed you the raw image, it was really dark. So we went ahead, bump up the exposure. Because it was already so dark, we can't really play with the contrast. We really have to leave that alone and, just have to let the image be where it is. If you do play with the contrast, you're probably lowering it, and then you can add clarity to it to kind of sharpen the image. So if I lowered this and I went ahead and I sharpened it, you can tell that it does help the image. Problem is that it also darkens a lot of the image. So I left those alone just so that I can get a bluer sky in the background. As you can tell, I really had to push the shadows all the way up in order to get the detail underneath the airplane. It's just one of the things that you're going to be doing a lot when you're taking pictures of airplanes on a nice, even on a cloudy day. There's still a lot of ambient light in which the underside of the aircraft is just going to be really underexposed. Bumped up the whites, removed some of the blacks again, just really to try to get the underside of the aircraft really well exposed so that you can see some of the detail, like that little United States Air Force logo right there that you can still see, even though at the beginning of the image you really couldn't see any of that. It was super dark. All right, so moving on, definitely had to bump up the vibrance and the saturations again, just to bring back the blue sky, but you got to be careful because you want to save that white streak. So I didn't really ramp it up super high to get back a really nice crispy blue background, but just enough so that I can get a blue background and still have that nice white streak coming through. For the tone curves, I definitely bumped up the high end just to brighten the overall image, and then I reduce the blacks just so I can get some details back because it was such a dark image to begin with. Went ahead and did that. This is the first one where I actually played around with saturation. So if you come over to this particular screen, there's this little button right here. If you click on it and then you drag it over here, you can actually expose just the specific color that you want. So like I can go super blue, and for an Instagram photo you might want to go this blue, but it kind of makes the aircraft a little bit too blue. That's the problem. So I went ahead and bumped it up just so I can get more blue in there, but I just wanted the specific color blue. That's why I didn't do it with just saturation, which just ramped up all colors. So it's a really useful tool. You can just select that, just pick whatever color on the image that you want to adjust, and you click on it and it'll move the corresponding colors accordingly. So it's super useful tool in Lightroom. And of course, I did my standard sharpening, which I use this little screen over here. And I usually pick like somewhere near the cockpit, hit the Alt key, and I went ahead and I sharpened it. Because it's a crop sensor body and I already have some noise in the image, I didn't really want to over sharpen here. So a lot of the times for images like this, I won't sharpen really dramatically. On a full frame camera, I can sharpen a whole lot more, really kind of make the aircraft pop out. But for crop sensors, I'm noticing that I am not sharpening as much. It's just one of the limitations of shooting on a crop sensor body. Again, I did add a lot of noise reduction in order to kind of, get rid of the pixelation. If I bring it all the way down, you can hopefully you can see that there is a lot of pixelation in the underside of the aircraft. So in order to help smoothen that out, added a lot of noise reduction, and that really seems to help it out. And I don't really seem to lose much detail in the actual image itself. So Lightroom is doing a fantastic job of really cleaning up the image with that noise reduction. And finally, just a slight vignette on it. One of the things that you'll notice is that if I go to masking, so I'm telling it where the edges are, if I bring this back, you'll notice that it does a really good job of masking. And you just want to make sure that you don't mask the clouds, but you can mask that white streak, and then it makes it stand out. It's super useful to make sure that you actually know how to use the detailed screen, in which you can actually mask what lines you want to really exemplify, or to really grab hold of and make that line really nice and crispy. Super great. All right. So that was a very quick look at some of the images that I have edited. I didn't want to make this video a little bit too long. Give me a little feedback. Do you rather have me editing the image as I go, or would you rather have me talking about the images on what I've already edited? Let me know, and thank you so much for watching.